20 of the most elite minds in San Francisco, forensic accountants from Seoul National, cybersecurity specialists from Stanford had spent 3 sleepless nights staring at cascading red digits on a wall of monitors. $50 million had vanished into digital darkness, and not one of them could find where it went. Then a 26-year-old janitor walked in to empty the trash. Kelly Adams was invisible. The kind of woman powerful men looked right through without seeing. A former MIT prodigy drowning in her father's legal bills, working 3 jobs just to survive in a rat-infested studio on the East Side. She had dropped out of college when a crooked DA framed her father and destroyed any future she thought she had. But when her eyes landed on those numbers glowing on the screen, something clicked. In exactly 60 seconds, while wiping down a conference table with one hand, she saw what 20 Ivy League graduates could not: a repeating sequence of prime numbers hidden in transaction logs. A simple, ancient accounting trick, disguised as noise. The money wasn't being stolen. It was being invited out. She had no idea that standing in the shadows behind her, watching her every movement with eyes like winter steel, was Junho Hwang himself, the undisputed king of the Korean underground. A man whose gold watch glinted like a predator's eye. A man whose neck tattoos told stories of wars won in blood and silence. A man who had killed more people than she had ever met. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from tonight. If Kelly's journey moves you, smash that like button and share it with someone who loves a tale of redemption and danger. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. Now let's find out what happens when the most powerful man in San Francisco becomes obsessed with the woman everyone else overlooked. Introduction. Transition. Into backstory. Junho stepped out of the shadows, his expensive leather shoes tapping softly against the polished obsidian floor. The sound cut through the tense silence like a blade. Who gave you permission to touch those documents? His voice was cold as December rain, smooth as aged whiskey, and sharp as broken glass. There was no question mark at the end because it wasn't a question, it was a command demanding an answer. Kelly startled, spinning around so fast the bucket of dirty water in her hands tipped over, crashing against the floor. Water splashed across his $1,000 Italian shoes, spreading like guilt across marble. She stood frozen, heart hammering against her ribs as she looked up into the coldest gray eyes she had ever seen in her life. Eyes that had watched men beg, eyes that had never blinked while pulling a trigger. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was just cleaning. I thought the room was empty." Kelly dropped to her knees, reaching for the rag to wipe his shoes. But Junho stepped back, his gaze never leaving the yellow notepad on the desk where she'd scribbled 3 lines of code and a single account number. "What did you write?" His tone hadn't changed. Still cold. Still lethal. But there was something underneath it now. Curiosity, maybe. Or danger. Kelly couldn't tell which. She swallowed hard, knowing she'd made a grave mistake by touching something that didn't belong to her inside the territory of a mafia boss. Her mouth went dry. Her hands trembled. "That?" She forced an awkward smile, trying to steady her voice. "I just thought the numbers looked strange, so I scribbled a few things. Bad habit of someone who mops floors. When I see something dirty, I want to clean it. Even filthy numbers." Junho's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those steel gray eyes. This was the first time in 15 years anyone had dared to joke in front of him when he was in the kind of mood that could end lives. "You think this is a joke?" He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing Kelly's small frame, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "No." She took a deep breath, lifting her chin to meet his gaze, even though every survival instinct screamed at her to look away. "If you really want to know, I think someone is stealing your money. And if you look at the account ending in 7,721, you'll see exactly where it's going." Junho stood completely still, a stone statue carved from danger and disbelief. In 20 years of running this empire, no one, not his accountants, not his advisors, not even his most trusted enforcers, had ever looked him straight in the eye and spoken to him like this, especially not a janitor still holding a wet rag. He pulled out his phone and dialed without breaking eye contact. "Jinwoo, come up here, now." Less than 2 minutes later, Jinwoo Benedetti stepped through the door. He was a mountain of a man with a scar running from his left temple to his jaw, the kind of scar that told stories no one wanted to hear twice. His eyes swept the room, landing on Kelly with the flat assessment of someone who'd buried bodies before breakfast. "Check the account ending in 7,721, Junho said without preamble. Jinwoo's gaze flickered to the notepad, then back to Kelly. He walked to the nearest workstation, his fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The room fell into a silence so thick Kelly could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She stood there, mop handle still clutched in one hand, aware of how ridiculous she must look. Her uniform was faded from too many washes. Her sneakers had a hole in the left toe, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that had given up hours ago. She was a smudge of poverty in a room full of designer suits and Italian leather. One of the experts, a man in his 50s with silver-rimmed glasses and a navy suit that screamed old money, finally broke the silence. "This is absurd. Why is the help talking?" "Sir, with all due respect, this is a waste of valuable time. We have protocols, systems." "She just told me where to find $50 million. Junho interrupted, his voice quiet but absolute. "What have you found in 3 days?" The man's face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth, then closed it, looking around the table for support that wasn't coming. Jinwoo straightened from the computer, his expression carved from granite. "She's right. The money's flowing through 17 shell companies into a holding account in the Cayman Islands. The recipient is Director Park." Every head in the room turned toward a man sitting at the far end of the table. Director Park was in his late 40s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of face that inspired trust. He'd been with the organization for 15 years, had attended Junho's father's funeral, had been there when Junho took power. Now he looked like a man watching his own execution. "That's impossible," Park stammered, standing so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. "There must be some mistake. I would never." "The loop Kelly identified is called a ghost payroll," Junho said, his voice dropping into a register that made the air feel thinner. "It's an old accounting trick. You create phantom employees, route payments through legitimate channels, but the money circles back through subsidiaries and offshore accounts. The pattern repeats every month on the same date. You got lazy, Park. You stopped changing the transaction codes." Park's face drained of color. His hands trembled as he looked from Junho to the door, calculating distances, survival odds. "Deal with him," Junho said to Jinwoo. Jinwoo moved with the efficiency of a man who'd done this before. 2 other guards materialized from the hallway, flanking Park before he could take a single step toward escape. They dragged him out, his protests fading into the building's depths like a man being pulled underwater. Kelly watched it happen with a strange sense of detachment. She'd just ended a man's life with 3 lines of code and an account number. The weight of it should have crushed her, but all she felt was numb. The room emptied quickly after that. The experts gathered their belongings with the hurried movements of people who wanted to forget this night ever happened. Within minutes, only Kelly and Junho remained. He walked toward her, each step deliberate, and Kelly felt her body lock into place. He didn't stop until he was close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something dark and expensive that probably had a French name she couldn't pronounce. "I didn't ask what you do," Junho said, his gray eyes searching her face like he was memorizing every detail. The bridge of her nose, the fullness of her lips, the way her brown eyes held both fear and defiance in equal measure. "I asked who you are." Kelly's throat went dry. She was used to being invisible, to sliding through life unnoticed, but under his gaze, she felt exposed, like he could see straight through her skin to all the broken parts underneath. "Kelly Adams," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. 26 years old, former MIT scholarship student before I dropped out to work 3 jobs and keep my father alive. I live in a studio apartment on the east side where the rats are so bold they don't even run when you turn on the lights. I owe money to people who break bones for late payments, and I haven't slept more than 4 hours a night in 2 years. She lifted her chin, meeting his stare with everything she had left. "And you owe me a new pair of shoes. These were the only ones I own that don't have duct tape holding them together." For the first time since she'd met him, Junho Huang smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his face from stone into something almost human. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, you'll come to my office. To mop more floors? To let me decide how much you're worth." Kelly pushed open the door to her apartment at 4 in the morning, and the familiar smell of mold and decay wrapped around her like a rotting blanket. The building was a graveyard for broken dreams, 5 floors of peeling paint and broken promises on the edge of the east side where the streetlights had given up years ago. She stepped over a pile of mail she couldn't afford to open and moved through the darkness by memory. The studio was smaller than most people's closets. A twin mattress on the floor, a hot plate on a card table, a bathroom she shared with the entire floor that hadn't seen proper cleaning since the Carter administration. Her father was asleep on the mattress, his breathing labored and wet. Ronald Adams had once been a proud man, a small business owner with dreams of leaving something behind for his daughter. Then a corrupt district attorney needed a fall guy for a money laundering scheme, and Ronald's name fit the narrative. The trial took 3 weeks. The guilty verdict took 3 hours. The appeal had been denied twice, and the legal bills were drowning them both. Kelly sank onto the floor beside him, touching his forehead. Fever. Again. The medication he needed was on a list of things she couldn't afford, somewhere between food and electricity. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, sunlight was stabbing through the broken blinds and her phone was buzzing with a number she didn't recognize. Miss Adams, Mr. Huang expects you in 1 hour. A car will pick you up. The line went dead before she could respond. Kelly looked down at herself. She had one outfit that wasn't her work uniform, a pair of thrift store jeans and a white button-down shirt with a stain on the collar she'd tried to bleach out. She showered in lukewarm water, braided her hair into something presentable, and was waiting on the curb when a black Mercedes pulled up. The ride to Huangjie Syndicate headquarters passed in silence. Kelly watched San Francisco blur past the tinted windows, the city transforming from decay to gleaming steel and glass as they moved from her world into his. The building was even more intimidating in daylight. Obsidian glass and sharp angles, a monument to power that made her feel like an ant approaching a giant's boot. Junho's office occupied the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the bay, the Golden Gate Bridge suspended in morning fog like a dream someone forgot to wake up from. The furniture was minimalist and brutally expensive, all clean lines and dark wood that probably came from forests with names she couldn't pronounce. Junho stood at the window, hands in his pockets, watching the city with the expression of a king surveying his kingdom. "You're punctual," he said without turning around. "You sent a car. It would have been rude to make him wait." He turned then, and in the morning light, Kelly could see details she'd missed last night. The tattoo on his neck was a dragon, its tail disappearing beneath his collar. His suit was charcoal gray, fitted so perfectly it looked painted on, and his eyes, those winter steel eyes, held an intensity that made her want to either run or move closer. She couldn't decide which. "I need someone who can see what others miss," Junho said. "My organization has grown too large, too complicated. People steal because they think I won't notice. They betray because they believe they're smarter than me." He walked toward his desk, pulled out a folder, and slid it across to her. "This is everything about you. Your father's case, your debt to Marcus Chen's loan operation, your academic records from MIT, your work history for the last 5 years. Kelly's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Every detail of her life laid bare in typed reports and highlighted documents. "I don't work for people who give me orders," she said, closing the folder with more force than necessary. "Life has been ordering me around for 26 years. I don't need another master." Junho studied her for a long moment, and Kelly could see him recalculating, adjusting his approach like a predator changing tactics. "Then this is an invitation, not an order. I'm offering you a position as my strategic advisor. Salary 10 times what you make now, plus benefits, plus a lawyer for your father's appeal. You'll work with me to find the leaks, the traitors, the people who think they can rob me blind." He leaned against the desk, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his irises. "But I have conditions too. You don't refuse my protection. You don't take unnecessary risks. And you never ever lie to me." Kelly's mind raced through the math. 10 times her salary meant she could pay off her debts in months instead of years. A real lawyer. Not the overworked public defender who'd spent 20 minutes on her father's appeal. A chance to breathe without drowning. But nothing in this world came free, especially not from a man like Junho Huang. "One condition," Kelly said. "You don't command me. You ask, you request. But you don't own me. I'm an advisor, not property." Junho's mouth curved into that almost smile again, and Kelly felt something dangerous flutter in her chest. "Agreed, Miss Adams. We have a deal." The transformation happened in stages. First, Junho sent Kelly to a boutique in Pacific Heights, where the saleswoman took one look at the black card he'd provided and treated her like visiting royalty. Kelly walked out in a charcoal silk blazer over a cream blouse, tailored black pants, and shoes that fit properly for the first time in years. She caught her reflection in the storefront window and barely recognized herself. The second transformation was her office. Not a cubicle, not a corner desk, but an actual office with glass walls on the 28th floor, one level below Junho's penthouse suite. She had access to every financial record, every transaction, every shadow account in the organization. Jinwoo became her unlikely guide through the building's power structure. He taught her who to trust, who to avoid, and who smiled while sharpening knives behind their backs. Gianna Costa, Jinwoo said on her third day, nodding toward a woman in her early 30s with sharp features and expensive taste. Head of acquisitions. She's been here 6 years, worked her way up from junior analyst. Smart, ambitious, dangerous. Kelly watched Gianna navigate the hallway like she owned it, her red heels clicking against marble with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. Gianna noticed them watching and changed course, walking straight toward Kelly with a smile that never reached her cold blue eyes. "You must be the famous Kelly Adams," Gianna said, her voice honey over broken glass. "The janitor who became a strategist overnight. How very Cinderella." "Nice to meet you too," Kelly replied, keeping her tone neutral. "Word of advice," Gianna continued, lowering her voice. "This building eats people like you for breakfast. You might have impressed Mr. Huang once, but talent without pedigree doesn't last long here." She walked away before Kelly could respond, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and veiled threats in her wake. That night, Kelly stayed late working on her first real assignment. Junho wanted a complete audit of the offshore accounts, tracking every dollar that moved through the organization's international network. It was complex, layered, deliberately obscure. She loved it. Around midnight, her office door opened, and Junho walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. He'd removed his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves to reveal forearms corded with muscle and ink. The dragon on his neck continued down his arm, she realized, disappearing into the fabric. "You should go home," he said, setting 1 cup on her desk. "So should you. I haven't slept properly in 15 years. Why start now?" Kelly took the coffee, grateful for the warmth against her hands. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that felt rare and valuable, watching the city lights flicker below like fallen stars. "Why did you really hire me?" Kelly asked. Junho was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice lower than usual, almost vulnerable. "Because you looked at me like I was human. Not a king, not a monster, just a man who needed help finding a thief." He turned to face her fully. "No one has looked at me like that in a very long time." Kelly's breath caught. She saw the loneliness in him then, the weight of a crown he'd never wanted, the isolation of power that kept everyone at arm's length. "I see you," she said softly. Something shifted in his expression, his gray eyes darkening with an emotion she couldn't name. He stood abruptly, like he needed distance before he did something they'd both regret. "Finish the report by Friday. And Kelly, be careful around Gianna. She doesn't handle threats to her position well." He left, and Kelly sat alone in her office, heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with work. 3 days later, Kelly finished the offshore audit and found 3 more leaks. Small ones, carefully hidden, but there. Junho acted on her intelligence immediately, and by the end of the week, 2 more executives had been quietly removed. Gianna watched it all with eyes full of calculation and growing hatred. Kelly spent 2 weeks building the comprehensive report Junho had requested, a deep analysis of the organization's financial vulnerabilities. She worked 16-hour days, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and the strange satisfaction that came from solving impossible puzzles. The report was everything. 200 pages of analysis, recommendations, and protective strategies that would make the Huangje syndicate virtually untouchable. On a Wednesday afternoon, Kelly saved the final version and stepped out to grab lunch. She was gone for exactly 15 minutes. When she returned, her computer screen displayed an error message that made her blood run cold. "File not found." Kelly's hands shook as she searched every folder, checked the backup servers, combed through recovery options. Nothing. The report had been completely erased, professionally wiped from every system. She looked up through her glass walls and saw Gianna standing at the far end of the hallway. Their eyes met for just a second, and Gianna smiled that shark smile before disappearing around the corner. Kelly could have reported her, could have gone straight to Junho. Instead, she sat down, cracked her knuckles, and started over. If Gianna thought deleting a file would break her, she didn't understand what real survival looked like. Kelly worked through the night, rebuilding from memory and raw determination. Around 3 in the morning, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave, and she picked up her phone, dialing without thinking. "Dad?" Her voice cracked. Did I wake you? Baby girl, I don't sleep much anymore. You okay? Yeah. I just needed to hear your voice. She paused, tears threatening. Can I tell you a story? Always. Once upon a time, there was a princess trapped in a tower. She was sick and afraid, and everyone told her she'd never escape. But she had someone who loved her, someone who traveled through fire and shadow to find a way to save her. And that person never gave up, no matter how hard the journey became. Because love is stronger than any prison, and hope is the key that unlocks every door. Her father was quiet for a moment. That's a good story, Kelly. When's your happy ending coming? Soon, Dad. I promise. Soon. Kelly didn't know that 4 floors above her, Junho sat in front of his security monitors, watching her wipe tears from her face and return to work. He'd seen everything. Seen Gianna delete the file. Seen Kelly's devastation. Seen her rebuild without asking for help. He turned off the monitors and took the elevator down, carrying 2 cups of coffee like an offering. When he entered her office, Kelly looked up with exhausted red eyes but didn't stop typing. You saw, she said. It wasn't a question. I did. Are you going to ask me why I didn't come to you? Junho set the coffee down and pulled up a chair, sitting across from her like they were equals, not king and subject. I'm going to ask you something else. Do you ever let anyone help you? Kelly's fingers stilled on the keyboard. Helping requires trust. Trust requires vulnerability. Vulnerability gets you hurt. Not always, Junho said quietly. Sometimes it sets you free. He told her then about his father, about the restaurant shooting, about inheriting an empire he'd never wanted. He told her about his dream of becoming an architect, of building beautiful things instead of managing an organization built on fear. I became the monster because someone had to, Junho said, his voice raw with old pain. But I never stopped being the boy who wanted to create instead of destroy. Kelly saw him fully then, the man beneath the crown, and something inside her cracked open. The Lord looks on the heart, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Not on the outside, not on the reputation. On what's true underneath. Junho reached across the desk and took her hand, and the touch was electric, dangerous, exactly what neither of them needed and both of them wanted. Finish your report, Kelly. But tomorrow, you rest. That's not a request. He left, and Kelly sat alone, her hand still warm from his touch, wondering when survival had transformed into something that looked dangerously like hope. The warning came on a Tuesday afternoon through Jinwoo, his scarred face graver than usual. Luca Huang just landed at SFO, he told Junho, and Kelly watched all the color drain from her boss's face. How long has he been back? 48 hours. He's been making calls, reaching out to old contacts, people your father exiled with him. Junho's hand tightened into a fist on his desk. Double security on all key personnel. I want eyes on him 24/7. And Kelly doesn't leave this building without a full detail. Kelly looked between them, confused. Who's Luca? My half-brother, Junho said, his voice colder than she'd ever heard it. The man my father expelled from the family 7 years ago for trying to stage a coup. He's smart, ruthless, and he hates me more than anything else in this world. For 3 days, Kelly lived under constant surveillance. Guards escorted her everywhere. Her apartment was swept for bugs. Her routine was analyzed and changed daily. She hated it. On Friday evening, Kelly convinced her detail to let her grab files from her car in the underground garage. It was a controlled space, cameras everywhere. What could happen in 5 minutes? The answer came fast. She'd just opened her car door when a chemical-soaked cloth clamped over her mouth from behind. Kelly tried to scream, to fight, but the world tilted sideways and went black. She woke in darkness, her head pounding like someone was using her skull as a drum. Her hands were bound behind her back with rope that bit into her wrists. Her legs were tied to a metal chair. The room smelled like oil and rust and old blood. A light flickered on, blinding her for several seconds. When her vision cleared, she saw a man standing in front of her. He looked so much like Junho, it was startling. Same sharp jawline, same powerful build, same gray eyes. But where Junho's gaze held controlled intensity, Luca's held chaos barely leashed. Hello, Kelly, Luca said, his voice smooth and educated. I've heard so much about you. The brilliant janitor who seduced my brother into forgetting everything our father built. I didn't seduce anyone, Kelly rasped, her throat raw. No? Luca circled her like a shark. Then why does Junho look at you like you're oxygen and he's drowning? Why does he break protocol, change security patterns, act like a lovesick fool instead of a leader? He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more violent. I need 3 things from you. The access codes to the offshore accounts, Junho's security schedule for next week, and the location of my father's emergency vault. I don't know any of that. Luca's smile was all teeth. Wrong answer. He nodded to someone behind her, and pain exploded across Kelly's back as something hard, metal maybe, an iron bar, struck between her shoulder blades. The air rushed from her lungs. Stars burst behind her eyes. The codes, Luca said calmly. Kelly coughed, tasting copper. Kill me. I'm not betraying him. Another blow, this time to her ribs. She heard something crack and wondered distantly if bones were supposed to make that sound. You're tougher than you look, Luca observed, but everyone breaks eventually. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure point. He pulled out his phone, showed her a photo that made her heart stop. Her father, leaving his building, unaware he was being watched. 1 call, Luca said softly. That's all it takes. I wonder how much pain an old man with a weak heart can handle before it just stops beating. Kelly looked at the photo, at her father's frail frame and tired smile, and felt something inside her break. Then she thought of Junho, of his rare smiles, of the way he looked at her like she mattered, of the dreams he'd buried to become what his family needed. She lifted her head, blood dripping from the corner of her mouth, and met Luca's eyes with everything she had left. Do whatever you want to me, but I will die before I give you anything that could hurt him. Not because I'm brave, because I know what real monsters look like, and you're just a child playing dress-up in daddy's clothes. Luca's expression twisted with rage, and Kelly braced herself for what came next, knowing she'd chosen truth over survival, and somehow, that felt like victory. Junho knew something was wrong the moment Kelly's phone went to voicemail for the 3rd time. She always answered. Always. He pulled up the security feeds and watched the garage footage with his heart in his throat. Saw Kelly approach her car. Saw the 2 masked figures emerge from behind a concrete pillar. Saw her collapse into their arms like a puppet with cut strings. The feed cut to black. Someone had disabled the cameras remotely, which meant they had help inside his organization. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Luca hadn't just come back. He'd infiltrated. Jinwoo burst into the office without knocking. We found the security guard who was paid to shut down the feeds. He gave up the location before we'd barely started asking questions. Where? Abandoned warehouse in Oakland. The one father used for interrogations before he died. Junho was already moving, shrugging into a shoulder holster, checking the chamber on his Glock with practiced efficiency. Get everyone. Full tactical. I want Luca alive if possible, but Kelly comes out safe. That's the only order that matters. 20 minutes later, 15 armed men surrounded the warehouse. Junho didn't wait for reconnaissance. He kicked in the door and moved through the darkness like a predator who'd finally found its prey. Gunfire erupted from the 2nd floor. 2 of Luca's men went down before they could fully aim their weapons. Another tried to run and made it 3 steps before Jinwoo put him down with a headshot that would have made their father proud. Junho moved through the carnage with singular focus, following the sound of voices to a room at the end of the corridor. He heard Kelly before he saw her, her voice hoarse but defiant. That's the best you can do? I've had worse from loan sharks with better creativity. He kicked the door off its hinges. Kelly was tied to a chair in the center of the room, her face swollen and bloodied, her shirt torn, dark bruises already forming on her brown skin, but her eyes, those fierce brown eyes, were still blazing with life. Luca stood behind her, gun pressed against her temple, using her as a human shield. Brother, Luca said with false warmth. I was wondering when you'd arrive. Your girlfriend is remarkably stubborn. I'm almost impressed. Let her go, Junho said, his voice dead calm, the kind of calm that came before hurricanes. This is between us. Everything is between us. The business, the legacy, father's love. You took it all, Junho. You were always the favorite, the chosen one, the perfect son. Luca's finger tightened on the trigger. So I'm going to take something from you. Time seemed to slow. Junho saw the decision in his brother's eyes, the moment Luca chose murder over mercy. He raised his own weapon and fired in the same heartbeat. The bullet caught Luca in the chest, center mass, exactly where their father had taught them both to aim for the killing shot. Luca's eyes widened with shock and something that might have been betrayal. His gun clattered to the floor as he stumbled backward, pressing a hand to the spreading crimson on his white shirt. You chose her, he whispered, blood bubbling on his lips. Over your own blood, you chose her. I chose the person who saw me, Junho said, and there was grief in his voice, real and heavy. The person who looked at the monster and found the man underneath. That's more than you ever did. Luca collapsed, and Junho didn't watch him die. He was already crossing the room, cutting through Kelly's bonds with a knife that appeared from nowhere, catching her as she sagged forward. "I've got you," he murmured, lifting her into his arms like she weighed nothing. "You're safe. I promise you're safe." Kelly's head lolled against his chest. "Your shoes are going to get bloody. They look expensive." Despite everything, Junho laughed, the sound broken and relieved. "I'll buy new ones." He carried her out of that warehouse of horrors, leaving his brother's body behind like a ghost from a past he was finally ready to bury. Kelly woke 3 days later in a bedroom bathed in soft gold light. The sheets beneath her were silk, softer than clouds. The ceiling above her was hand-painted with scenes of cherry blossoms and distant mountains. She turned her head, slowly because everything hurt, and saw Junho asleep in a chair beside the bed. He'd pulled it so close his hand rested on the mattress near hers, like even in sleep he couldn't stop reaching for her. His face was unshaven, dark circles carved beneath his eyes, his shirt wrinkled. He looked exhausted and beautiful, and exactly like what Kelly had been running from since the moment they'd met. She reached out and touched his hand. Junho woke instantly, his gray eyes flying open, and the relief that flooded his face nearly broke her. "You're awake," he breathed. "How long?" 3 days. The doctor said you have 2 cracked ribs, a concussion, and extensive bruising, but you'll heal completely. Kelly nodded, then asked the question that had been haunting her since consciousness returned. "Luca?" "Dead." Junho's voice held no satisfaction, only tired acceptance. "I killed my own brother to save you, and I would do it again without hesitation. Does that make me the monster everyone believes I am?" Kelly squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses and scars, the physical evidence of a life spent fighting. "It makes you human. It makes you someone who chose love over loyalty to a title. That's not monstrous. That's brave." Junho leaned forward, resting his forehead against their joined hands, and Kelly felt his shoulders shake with silent emotion he'd probably never allowed himself before. They stayed like that as morning light painted the room in shades of gold and promise. 2 broken people who'd found something whole in each other. Kelly's recovery took 3 weeks. Junho moved her into his penthouse, claiming it was for security. But they both knew the truth. He couldn't stand having her out of his sight. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching fog roll over the bay, when the elevator opened and a woman stepped out without announcement or permission. She was stunning in the way ice sculptures are stunning, beautiful and cold and untouchable. Platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders. Her dress was white and expensive, designer couture that probably cost more than Kelly's entire education. Blue eyes swept the room with the calculating assessment of someone used to owning everything she looked at. "So you're the cleaning lady," the woman said in Russian-accented English. "I expected someone more impressive." Junho emerged from his office, and his expression went carefully blank. "Natasha, I didn't know you were coming." "Clearly." Natasha walked further into the penthouse like she owned it, her heels clicking against marble. "Father sent me to check on you. There are rumors you've been distracted, making poor decisions, allowing your empire to crumble because of some American girl." "My empire is fine," Junho said coldly. "Is it?" Natasha turned to Kelly, looking her up and down with open disdain. "This is what distracted you from our engagement? A former janitor with no family, no education, no value beyond whatever charity case appeal she provides?" Kelly felt anger rise in her chest, hot and sharp. She'd dealt with classism her entire life, but Natasha's particular brand of cruelty cut deeper because it came wrapped in the truth of a prior claim. "I'm not a charity case," Kelly said quietly. "I'm the person who saved his business when your specialists couldn't. I'm the person who sees past the crown to the man underneath. And I'm the person he chose." "Chose?" Natasha laughed, the sound brittle and cold. "Darling, men like Junho don't choose. They fulfill obligations. Our families arranged this marriage before we were teenagers. That contract supersedes whatever temporary infatuation he has with you." She walked to Junho, placed a possessive hand on his chest, and Kelly saw him stiffen but not pull away. "Tell her, darling. Tell her this is just a phase, that in 3 months we'll be married and she'll be a footnote in your past." Junho's eyes met Kelly's across the room, and she saw the war being fought behind that gray gaze. Duty versus desire, legacy versus love. "Natasha, we need to talk privately." he said. Something in Kelly's chest cracked. He didn't deny it. Didn't send Natasha away. Just asked to talk privately. Like Kelly was the outsider instead of the woman he'd killed his own brother to save. Of course, Natasha purred. I'll be waiting in your office. She left, and Kelly stood frozen by the window, watching her reflection in the glass blend with the fog outside. Kelly, Junho started. Don't. She turned to face him, and she made sure her voice didn't shake even though her heart was shattering. I understand. Political alliances matter more than a girl from the East Side. I was naive to think 3 weeks could compete with a lifetime of family obligation. It's not that simple. It never is. Kelly walked toward the elevator, each step requiring more strength than facing down Luca's torture. I'll move my things out today. Thank you for the opportunity to work here. It's been educational. Kelly, wait. The elevator doors closed on whatever he'd been about to say, and Kelly rode down alone, wondering when she'd become the kind of fool who believed fairy tales could come true. She returned to her work the next day with a wall built firmly around her heart. She was professional, efficient, and utterly closed off. Junho tried to talk to her twice. Both times she redirected to work topics and walked away. Natasha made herself comfortable in the building, holding court in the executive dining room, making sure everyone knew she was the future Mrs. Huang. But Kelly noticed things others missed. Small discrepancies in the international accounts, money flowing through channels that didn't match any legitimate business, transfers timed to Natasha's phone calls. She worked through the night, following the thread of corruption, and what she found made her blood run cold. Natasha wasn't just Junho's fiancée. She was funding a coup. She'd made contact with what remained of Luca's loyalists, promised them power and position if they helped her remove Junho and install herself as the head of a united Russian-Korean syndicate. The attack was scheduled for Christmas night when security would be minimal and Junho would be vulnerable. Kelly printed the evidence and walked straight to Junho's office at 2 a.m. He was alone, tie loosened, looking at architectural plans spread across his desk. Plans for buildings he'd never built. I need to show you something, Kelly said. She laid out the evidence, watching his expression shift from confusion to understanding to cold rage. She's been planning this since before Luca died, Kelly said. Using you, using the engagement, using everything. The wedding was never going to happen because you were never going to survive long enough to make it to the altar. Junho was silent for a long time, his hands flat on the desk like he needed something solid to anchor him. Why are you showing me this? He finally asked. Why are you showing me this? He finally asked. I haven't exactly been fair to you. I let Natasha believe she had claim to me. I let you walk away. Kelly met his gaze straight on, and her voice was steady even though her heart was breaking. Because whatever happened between us, whatever didn't happen, you don't deserve to be betrayed by someone you trusted. And because the man who stayed beside my hospital bed for 3 days, who listened to my father's stories, who saw me when I was invisible to everyone else, that man deserves to know the truth. Junho stood slowly, walked around the desk until he was close enough that she could see the war still being fought in those gray eyes. I was going to break the engagement tomorrow, he said quietly. I was finalizing the terms tonight, making sure Natasha's father wouldn't declare war over the insult. I've been working with intermediaries for 2 weeks, trying to find a way to end this without bloodshed. Kelly's breath caught. What? You walked into the elevator before I could tell you that day. Before I could say that no political alliance, no family obligation, no empire matters more than the woman who makes me feel human again. He reached up, his hand hovering near her face like he was afraid she'd disappear if he touched her. I chose you the moment you looked at me with those fierce eyes and demanded I buy you new shoes. Everything since then has just been me catching up to what my heart already knew. Kelly felt tears burning behind her eyes. You chose me. I will always choose you. The words hung between them like a vow, and Kelly closed the distance, letting herself lean into his touch when his hand finally cupped her face. Then we need to prepare, she said, because Natasha won't wait for you to break the engagement. She's planning to strike on Christmas night. We have 72 hours. Junho's expression shifted from vulnerability to the cold calculation that made him dangerous. Then we'll be ready. Christmas night arrived wrapped in winter fog that made San Francisco look like a city suspended in dreams. The Huangja Syndicate building stood dark, except for security lights, exactly as it should be during a holiday when most employees were home with family. But inside, Junho and his most trusted people waited in the shadows. Kelly monitored the security feeds from Junho's office, watching the garage entrance where Natasha's forces would enter. Jinwoo had positioned 15 men throughout the building, all of them loyal, all of them ready. At 11:45, the first vehicle appeared, then another, 6 total, carrying at least 30 armed men. "They're here," Kelly said into the comms. Junho's voice came back calm and certain. "Let them in. Spring the trap when they reach the 25th floor." Kelly watched the feeds as Natasha's forces moved through the building with military precision. They'd been well-trained, well-briefed on the layout. They moved like they belonged here. They reached the 25th floor and spread out, searching for Junho's penthouse access. That's when the lights went out. Gunfire erupted in the darkness, muzzle flashes painting the corridors in strobe light violence. Junho's men had the advantage of position and preparation. Natasha's forces had numbers but no cover. The battle was brutal and fast. Kelly tracked movement on thermal sensors, calling out positions, coordinating the defense like she was conducting an orchestra of controlled chaos. Then she saw it. A separate signature moving alone toward the executive floor, bypassing the main fight entirely. "Natasha." "She's going for your office," Kelly said into the comms. "Junho, she's coming for you. Stay where you are," Junho ordered. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." But Kelly was already moving because she'd learned something important in the past few months. Sometimes love meant following orders. Sometimes it meant breaking them to keep the person you loved alive. She met Natasha in the hallway outside Junho's office. The Russian woman was dressed for war in black tactical gear, a gun held with professional competence. "You should have stayed hidden, little maid," Natasha said, raising her weapon. "I would have let you live, sent you back to your rat-infested apartment with a nice severance package." "You would have killed me the moment I stopped being useful," Kelly replied. "Because that's what people like you do. You use people until they're empty, then discard them, and people like you survive on hope and fairy tales." Natasha's finger moved to the trigger. "Let me show you how the real world works." The shot rang out, but it didn't come from Natasha's gun. Junho stood at the end of the hallway, smoke still curling from his weapon, and Natasha looked down at the spreading red on her chest with an expression of genuine surprise. "You shot me," she whispered. "For her. You shot me for a janitor." "I shot you for being a traitor," Junho corrected, walking forward. "Kelly's worth has nothing to do with her job title. It has to do with her character, her brilliance, her courage. Things you've never understood because you measure value in bloodlines and bank accounts." Natasha collapsed to her knees, then forward onto the marble floor. Her last breath carried words in Russian that Kelly didn't understand but could translate from tone alone. Curse words, hatred, disbelief that she'd been beaten by someone she'd considered beneath her. Junho crossed to Kelly, his hands running over her face, her arms, checking for injuries. "You were supposed to stay locked inside. I know. I'm not very good at following orders. I've noticed." But he was smiling as he said it, and Kelly saw nothing but relief in his eyes. The cleanup took until dawn. Natasha's remaining forces either surrendered or fled. Jinwoo coordinated with police contacts who understood that some fights happened outside the law's jurisdiction. And when the sun finally broke through San Francisco's fog, Kelly stood beside Junho in his penthouse, watching light paint the city in shades of gold and new beginnings. "It's over," she said quietly. "One chapter," Junho agreed. "But I'm hoping the next one is just beginning." The fallout from Christmas night rippled through San Francisco's underworld like an earthquake. Natasha's father threatened war, then reconsidered when evidence of her coup attempt was leaked to his most trusted advisors. Gianna Costa was found to have been feeding information to Natasha for months. She disappeared from the city overnight, and no one asked where she went. Kelly's father had his conviction overturned in February. New evidence, mysteriously discovered and perfectly documented, proved the former district attorney had fabricated the entire case. Ronald Adams walked out of prison into his daughter's arms, and Kelly cried for the first time since the warehouse. Junho was there, standing back far enough to give them privacy, but close enough that Kelly knew she wasn't alone anymore. In March, Junho took Kelly on a drive without explanation. They ended up in her old neighborhood, the east side she'd grown up in, survived in, escaped from. He stopped in front of a house she recognized immediately, her childhood home, where her father had run his small business, where her mother had planted flowers that never quite survived the harsh soil, where Kelly had learned that poverty was a cage with invisible bars, except the cage had been transformed. The house stood completely rebuilt. Fresh paint, new windows, a garden that looked like something from a magazine. The fence was white and straight, The steps were solid. Everything broken had been made whole. "What did you do?" Kelly whispered. Junho took her hand, led her to the front door, and placed a key in her palm. "I want to rebuild your dream in the place where you lost it. This is yours, Kelly. Yours and your father's. No strings, no obligations. Just a home where the memories don't all hurt." Kelly's hands shook as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The interior was beautiful, warm, everything she'd imagined as a child when she dreamed of better days. Modern kitchen, comfortable furniture, sunlight streaming through clean windows. Her father stood in the living room, tears streaming down his face, and Kelly ran to him like she was 10 years old again. Junho watched from the doorway, and Jinwoo, standing guard outside, saw something he'd never seen before. His boss, the king of San Francisco's underworld, smiling with pure, uncomplicated joy. That evening, as the sun set over the renovated house, Junho led Kelly to the backyard where her mother's flower garden had once struggled and died. Now it bloomed with roses in every color, healthy and thriving. He knelt on the soft grass, pulled a small box from his pocket, and opened it to reveal a diamond that caught the fading light and threw rainbows across Kelly's stunned face. "I can't promise you a normal life," Junho said, his voice rough with emotion. "I can't promise there won't be danger, that enemies won't come, that my past won't cast shadows on our future. But I can promise to stand beside you every day, to fight for you, to protect you, to love you until my last breath." He looked up at her. This man who'd killed for her, who'd changed for her, who'd chosen her over everything else. "Kelly Adams, will you marry me?" Kelly dropped to her knees in front of him, taking his face in her hands, and her voice was steady and sure. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The wedding happened in that same backyard 6 months later. Small, intimate, only people who truly mattered. Jinwoo stood as best man, looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo but genuine in his happiness. Kelly's father walked her down a makeshift aisle, healthy and whole for the first time in years. Kelly wore a simple white dress that made her look like light given form, and when Junho saw her, his eyes shone with unshed tears. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about seeing each other, choosing each other, building something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. When Junho kissed her, sealing the promise, the small crowd erupted in applause, and Kelly felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. 5 years later, Kelly stood in the offices of the Second Chance Foundation, watching a group of teenagers from the East Side learn coding and financial analysis. The foundation was her dream made real, a place that gave kids like she'd been a chance to escape poverty through education and opportunity. The door opened, and Junho walked in carrying their 3-year-old son on his shoulders. Their 5-year-old daughter ran ahead, her dark curls bouncing as she launched herself at Kelly. "Daddy said we could get ice cream if you say yes," she announced with the confident negotiation skills of a child raised by a mafia boss and a financial strategist. "Did he now?" Kelly scooped her daughter up, meeting Junho's amused gray eyes over their children's heads. He'd gone legitimate, mostly. The Hwangjae Syndicate still existed but operated within the law now, a security and consulting firm that advised Fortune 500 companies. The transition had taken years and cost him relationships with people who preferred the old ways. But Junho had told her once that he'd spent his whole life being what others needed him to be. Now he wanted to be what his children could be proud of. Their son started pulling Junho's hair, demanding attention, and Kelly laughed at the sight of the former kingpin, wincing and trying to extract small fingers from his carefully styled hair. "Ice cream sounds perfect," Kelly said. They were walking to the car when Kelly's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it and felt her blood run cold. It was a screenshot of a financial transaction. Complex, layered, deliberately hidden. And in the notes section, a single line. "The 7,721 account wasn't the only place I hid money. See you soon, Kelly. We have unfinished business." Kelly stared at the message, then looked up at Junho, who'd noticed her expression change. "What is it?" he asked. Kelly showed him the screen, and she watched his face shift from confused to alert. Their eyes met, and she saw the same thing she felt reflected in his gaze. Not fear. Not dread. The thrill of the hunt. "Looks like someone wants to play," Kelly said. And despite everything, despite the peace they'd built, despite the children who needed them safe, she felt a spark of excitement ignite in her chest. Junho shifted their son to one hip and took Kelly's hand with his free one. "Then we'll play. Together." Their daughter looked between them with the intuitive understanding children have. "Are you hunting bad guys again?" "Maybe," Kelly said, kissing her forehead. "But first, ice cream." They loaded the kids into the car, drove toward the ice cream shop on Market Street, and Kelly watched the city blur past the windows. San Francisco, the place where she'd been invisible, where she'd been broken, where she'd been saved. She thought about the girl in the blue jumpsuit who'd walked into that conference room with nothing but a mop and a sharp mind, thought about how far she'd traveled, how much she'd survived, how completely she'd been transformed, not because someone rescued her, because she'd saved herself first, and then found someone strong enough to stand beside her instead of trying to carry her. Kelly squeezed Junho's hand, felt him squeeze back, and smiled. The story wasn't over. Somewhere out there, someone was waiting with dirty numbers and dark intentions. But this time, Kelly wasn't alone in the shadows. This time, she was a queen hunting alongside her king. And God help anyone foolish enough to underestimate the janitor who'd brought an empire to its knees with nothing but 60 seconds and the truth. The hunt continued, but so did the love. And that, Kelly thought as her daughter laughed at something her brother said, was the real victory. Not the battles won or the enemies defeated, but the family built from ashes, and the future written in hope instead of fear.